Time is up. Okay, so here is Mary Gutman.
Thank you very much. Let's see, can you help me get to the PowerPoint there, so it's not all showing? Well, first of all, that was like a tough act to follow. Is that being disrespectful? I'd like to start with reading Psalm 121, which I think is appropriate right now. I lift up my eyes toward the mountains. Whence shall help come to me? My help is from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. May he not suffer your foot to slip. May he slumber not who guards you. Indeed, he neither slumbers nor sleeps, the guardian of Israel. The Lord is your guardian, the Lord is your shade. He is beside you at your right hand. The sun shall not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your life. The Lord will guard your coming and your going, both now and forever. Amen. I love that psalm. Well, I love the Psalms, period.
Yes.
We affirm the dignity of life when we create times for us to acknowledge that dying is a part of living, because we know that we will all die someday. For the past several years, Margie Christie, who is now the executive director at Dayton Right to Life, has put together a team. There are 3 of us on that team. I'm on the team now, but I was not always the medical person or the nurse. Of Margie and an attorney, Jonathan Faulkner, who is actually a graduate of Cedarville, and a very proud one that is, and a nurse, to go out to faith communities, particularly parishes and churches, to talk about end of life as a part of being pro-life. And so this morning, for just a little bit, I'm going to share with you some of the things that we share when we go out. And why is this important? It's important because there's another movement going on that maybe you're aware of or not, and that is the whole issue of physician-assisted suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I always used to say back in the 70s, when I first became involved in pro-life work, that this is one big slippery slope.
Yeah.
And it's proving true.
Amen.
We could go on about all kinds of other issues, but physician-assisted suicide, some of us are old enough in this room to remember Jack Kevorkian.
Oh,
Dr.
I
Jack.
remember him.
And he was about euthanasia, which was directly involving himself as a physician in killing people, basically. And then he got into some trouble, and he kind of dissolved, and I don't even know whatever. I think he died. He did,
Eventually,
okay.
right. He was in prison
But
for a while.
the new push is physician-assisted suicide, and perhaps some of you remember about 4 or 5 years ago, there were 2 young women. One of them, her name was Brittany Menard, or you might pronounce it Maynard, but it was pronounced Menard. And she lived in California. She was a newlywed. And she developed a form of cancer called a glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive brain tumor that just is, most of the time, it's fatal. And she developed that brain tumor and was treated and was having the side effects of treatment that was not easy for her, and decided to move to Oregon, where she could have physician-assisted suicide, because at the time, California, it wasn't legal. So she eventually became like the news. If you watched any mainstream media, you heard about her. Now, I just want to say, I'm not criticizing her in these remarks,
Right.
but I am saying that she was literally pushed along the way by a group called Compassion and Choices. Now, Compassion and Choices, doesn't that sound gentle?
Right.
Well, the former name of Compassionate Choices was the Hemlock Society. And that didn't sound as gentle. So they changed their name and they started getting people, there were people writing books about physician-assisted suicide and how compassionate this was to the dying person. And they were moving along. They had 3 or 4 states in the United States that actually were allowing for physician-assisted suicide. But along came Brittany, and she became their poster child, and was on every news media. And People magazine did a whole expose or a whole piece on her. And eventually, she took her own life by the drugs that were prescribed for her. Now, and then her husband actually went on a speaking circuit, and from the time that she died until today, there are now, from 4 or 5 states, there are 9 states where physician-assisted suicide is legal. There was some movement in Ohio, but from my understanding from the legislators, it hasn't gone very far because Ohio is a fairly pro-life state at this point in time, given our governor and legislators. So contrast her with another young woman, 19 years old, named Lauren Hill. Lauren was a student at Mount St. Joseph University in Cincinnati and was given a basketball scholarship. And only about 9 or 10 weeks after she got to Mount St. Joe's, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. It was not a glioblastoma, but it was called a pontine tumor, I believe. Very rare. And she underwent chemo and radiation and all the things that they would try to do to alleviate that tumor. But that tumor eventually took her life. She received some local publicity, but nothing like what Brittany Menard received. And Lauren died, and her coach said, when she played, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 games for the Mount, and that got some news. When she died, her coach said, she was so disappointed that she could not use her talents to win basketball games for Mount St. Joe's. But he said, what she gave us by her example of living and dying, we could never, ever, ever repay her for. So here we have, this all occurred, but the contrast between these 2 women is what prompted a little bit what Margie always says. We have to get in front of this initiative of physician-assisted suicide. We didn't get in front of abortion when abortion was being pushed. Abortion, it's like, first it wasn't, and then it was. And I hate to say it, but we kind of failed in that respect. So here we are, coming along, doing our little, we call it, it's not a little dog and pony show, but we go out to parishes and churches that invite us to come in to talk to the congregation about end-of-life issues. So what we do, my portion of this is partially what you're going to hear. What John does is he talks about advance directives, primarily the living will, but most importantly, the healthcare power of attorney, which is different than a power of attorney, which allows you to name someone to help make decisions for you when you are no longer able to make them, either temporarily because you're under anesthesia or whatever, or permanently. And the people who really need healthcare powers of attorney are young people over the age of 18. Because what happens when you need somebody to help you make decisions? And when your child, you've heard this, you guys, when you go to college and you're 18 years old, your mom and dad don't have any more say in your health care anymore because you're an adult. And that's always shocking to parents. It was shocking to me when my first child went to college. So what we try to do is go out and talk about advance directives, some of the basic teachings of the church, the Christian church, but I would say in a Judeo-Christian environment this applies. And also, we talk about the medical issues. And then how do you have these conversations with your family about your own life and your own death and what you might want at the time of your death. So there's an Irish proverb that says, it's in the shelter of each other that people live. It's kind of the whole business that we all live in community, we live in family, we live in a faith community. And when we approach end-of-life decisions, we need to understand how to shelter or to support our loved ones. My own father died when I was 5 years old. My mother lived until 94. And it was helpful, more than helpful, it was imperative that I understood what she wanted. But as I go on, you'll kind of understand how that was not a problem. So before we begin talking to our parents or our siblings or our spouse or anybody else about end-of-life issues, we have to figure out, how do we feel about our own death? What's our family of origin? How was death dealt with in our own family? In my case, my dad, an only child, died when he was 35 years old and I was 5 years old. And his parents were German. And his father, probably, my grandpa died when he was 86 years old, never got over the fact that his only child, his son, died when he was 35. He was angry, he never wanted to talk about it. For me, worse yet, when my dad died, he died at home. I was quickly whisked out of the house to the neighbor's house and never was able to ever see him again.
Yeah.
I was not allowed to go to the funeral, I was not allowed, nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Really.
Do you know how that affected me as a child? It affected, because we couldn't talk about death. So if you come from a family where that's an issue, or maybe you come from a family where death is a celebrated thing, you need to think about how that is. Past experiences I just discussed. Your faith life is very important.
Sure is.
I always tell my kids, we've got 5 kids. It's our second marriage. We've been married 25 years. Our kids have had various experiences. We have some that don't go to church at all, to our great dismay, but that is the way it is. We have some that go to church. We have some that are sort of on the fence, but they darn well know how we believe, what we believe. And we practice our faith, and we try to share our faith. And I can still remember one Thanksgiving when I was with my oldest son and his family, who didn't at that time go to church, any church. And we said, let's say grace before meals. And the other side of the family, one of the people said, why are we gonna pray? And I'm like, what? It's Thanksgiving. Well, but you see what I mean?
Yeah.
There is no doubt, but living your faith life is extremely, I think, important, irregardless of who's following behind you and what they're watching you, believe me. And then there are a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions about medical procedures. My bedside experience was always in critical care nursing. I was an ICU nurse, hemodialysis, acute burns, coronary care, and I was with a lot of people at the time of their death. And I honestly think God called me for an avocation to become a nurse because of my experiences as a little girl, losing my dad at a young age, and realizing that medical advancements were there and that if he had lived just a couple of years longer, there would have been a drug that could have helped cure him, or at least alleviate his illness. But back to the misconceptions. There are people, you've all heard the term pull the plug.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have never in my 2 years professional life ever saw anybody to go up to the socket and pull a plug.
Right.
It doesn't happen like that.
That's right.
But a lot of people think that is what happens
Yeah.
when you wean someone off a ventilator or when you stop doing a certain treatment. It's not true. So we try to go around and talk about that a little bit. Some of the basic teaching in my faith life, and I'm sure in your faith life, is that life is sacred from the very first moment of conception
Yeah.
to the moment of natural death.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the, what do you call it, the mortar. That's the mortar.
That's right.
Life is eternal.
It is too.
We look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come.
Amen.
We know that when this body dies, that we don't
That's not
die.
the end.
That's why Jesus came. I mean, you know? And this is something that I was a little girl, I went to Catholic school, and we had this thing called the Baltimore Catechism that came out of the Baltimore Council. Okay. So and this is how we learned what our faith was about. We memorized it. And every day, we'd have like 3 or 4 or 10 questions, and then whomever would quiz us because we had to memorize it. So one of the things we memorized is that we are created in the image and likeness of God. But that is the truth.
Amen.
And if we
Everybody.
believe that, then all of this slippery slope stuff that's been going on, that makes a difference.
Absolutely.
So we share that. And then we talk about, this is related to the pull the plug stuff. This gets people every time. When you have a family, let's say you have an elderly parent that has a stroke, or you have a spouse that has a heart condition, or when there's cancer, and we've all been through this. At some point in our life, we've faced this. There is something called ordinary versus extraordinary treatment. Now, part of my professional life, I got to be on a ethics committee, and this was a committee that we didn't make decisions for people, but we helped guide decision-making of the professionals and sometimes family members that would come to us. And we had regular meetings to talk about regular things, and then we would be consulted. And what happened most of the time, it was end-of-life decision-making. And around 1989 to 1982, 92, somewhere in there, the federal government came out with a law it was called the PSDA. It was now I just had a brain thing. Never mind. But from that came when you go to the hospital for treatment, they ask you, do you have a living will or do you have an advance directive? Every single time. That came out of that law. And Ohio was one of the last states in the union to develop an advanced directives, a living will or a durable health care power of attorney. So prior to 92, prior to that time frame, we used to get a lot more questions. But basically, I'm going off script here, ordinary, we are obligated to provide and to accept ordinary means of sustaining life. So that means if I'm allergic to bee stings and I get stung by a bee and my throat starts to, I'm doing this, I'm getting into an anaphylactic situation and they take me over to the hospital, the ordinary means of treatment for that is to give me an antihistamine, usually like epinephrine IV or something, to reverse depending upon how bad that anaphylactic reaction is. So that's ordinary care. There's nothing big about it. These treatments offer reasonable hope of benefit without excessive burden. They are, examples are food, water, certain medical care, and this really is in the definition, exercise. I who don't exercise as much as I should, kind of glad. Okay, and the teaching is based on natural law and the fifth commandment. That's it. When we talk about extraordinary treatment, if treatment proposed entails significant burdens that are out of proportion to the benefit, then it's extraordinary. An example would be, let's say you have cancer and it has metastasized and your kidneys are affected. And somebody would say, well, we can give you some time by putting you on hemodialysis, which is, your blood goes through the machine and impurity and then get it back.
Filter, basically.
For you, that hemodialysis could be considered extraordinary treatment because it's only going to prolong the your inevitable dying, which is sort of in front of you. Maybe that's not the best example, but it's an example. We have a lot of people that will get on, in the old, when I call the old days, I'm talking about the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. That's how old I am. But we used to get people on ventilators with chronic obstructive disease all the time. When I say ventilators, you know, those things that you put a tube down your okay. And you're on the ventilator, and then you couldn't get them off because they couldn't wean. Their lungs were so stiff, you just couldn't get them off. Then the dilemma was, how are we going to get them off the ventilator? So you try weaning them, you know, like 15 minutes out of every hour, and then they would tank, and you'd back on the ventilator. I don't mean to, does that sound, I'm not trying to sound disrespectful, but you know what I mean, they're going downhill. So I remember one time we had a man on the ventilator in ICU for 45 days. And pretty soon his body just failed. But there was no weaning him. Prior to advanced directives, that's what I mean by that was extraordinary for him. And if there was the ability to wean him off that ventilator, that would have been merciful. And this poor dear man, because he was so sick, he couldn't even make those decisions for himself. So that's extraordinary treatment. Then comes the issue, this is a hot button, it used to be, but it still is, of hydration and nutrition. Water and food. They're natural means, they're not medical care. They're considered ordinary care, and they're proportionate to the means of care, and they're obligatory to provide. But, and here's the big, no, I'm not going to say it, the big but, the big if. If a person, oftentimes people who've had strokes especially, have trouble swallowing. And so, one of the first things you get is a swallowing study. And if you can't get that, whatever they give you in the swallowing study, if it looks like you're not going to be able to swallow it, it's going to go in your lungs, that becomes a problem. So then they can't be fed until they either are given a tube that goes down their nose, down their esophagus, which is called, well, it's not important, but, or another type of tube that is surgically inserted in the stomach. And most long-term care facilities will not accept patients who have a swallowing problem if they don't have some form of feeding tube in, and mostly it's a PEG tube, which is the stomach tube. That creates a lot of concerns for people about nutrition and hydration. Here is the sort of medical truth of it. You can't keep putting food, especially tube feeding, and sometimes even water into a person at the time that they're dying. They will not assimilate it. They won't absorb it. So it becomes okay then to say, let's stop this. And there are certainly nursing interventions to be able to make a person comfortable by using, not those icky sponge things, but like something soaked with water. You put it between their lips and they can just suck it, just get that so that their mouth isn't so dry, and good mouth care. So, but I gotta just put my little caveat here, and that is, every single situation is different. When we do these talks, we go out, we have lines of people with it. What about this and what about, every situation is different. So you can't make a blanket statement.
Right.
But you have to understand that sort of the basic premises of what is allowed or what is offered to a person is not something that's going to keep. That man that was on the ventilator for all those days, we hated to come to work because we would see his face and we would know this is not working for him and there's nothing we can do. And that was in the late 70s, I think. Okay, let me just talk a little bit about pain management. The church teaches that people should be kept as free from pain as possible. So if you have severe pain, you're not supposed to lay in bed and writhe. I mean, that is not charitable. That is not part of loving your neighbor. Now, I know I've had questions from people, but what about redemptive suffering? Trust me, people suffer in more ways than excruciating pain at the time, sometimes when they're dying. There's emotional suffering
You got that.
that goes on. And pain medication that could indirectly shorten a person's life is morally permissible as long as the intent is not to alleviate. It is to alleviate the pain and not hasten death. So like in hospice, so many people who have, and you don't have to have cancer to go to hospice, by the way, but if you have a terminal situation or a situation that, when I say imminently terminal, it could be within 6 months or even a year. Sometimes pain is out of control, and that's one reason to be admitted to an inpatient hospice. And it differs a little bit from palliative care, but not that much. In other words, there are interventions, and nobody does a better job, in my estimation, of pain management than hospice, because they know how to do it without completely clunking, not so a person can't make decisions. Now, you probably may all have situations where you've observed differently, but I will tell you, just recently, a very dear person in our lives died. And he went to hospice probably within 4 days before his death. He got to hospice, immediately got the pain under control because it was pretty bad. And they treated him with such dignity. He loved music, he loved the sunlight. They got his bed outside so the sun could shine on him and he could listen to classical music. And he fell asleep, and he was relaxed. And in that relaxation, because he was fighting pretty hard, he was able to, within the next week, he died peacefully.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about. But trust me, we have so many misconceptions, and that's why we have to think about how we feel about certain things. So we also talk to people about talking to your physician. So if you're given a diagnosis, what is your prognosis? What are the risks and benefits of that treatment that's proposed? How will the treatment affect my quality of life? What are the best and worst outcomes? And if I decide not to undergo treatment, how long would I be expected to live? I don't know too many physicians that can give you a date and a time, because people ask that all the time. But I have to tell you, my husband's first mother-in-law, her name was Mary also, she lost both of her children, and they were adults. And all she ever wanted to do is have Jesus come in the middle of the night and take her. And guess what? He didn't do it that way. But one day, she had excruciating pain, and she went to the doctor, and she had liver cancer. And the doctor called my husband and I up on the phone and said, what are we going to do about this? Do you want to bring her in? Do you want to tell her yourselves? What do you want? Well, we said she's probably going to be overjoyed, but on the other hand, I think she needs to hear it from you. So we hauled her up to the doctor. She sat down, and she was Southern Baptist. And when he told her that she had liver cancer, and she probably had 6 weeks to live, she said, praise Jesus. And we went, and then she looked at us and said, can we go out for a steak? And I said, well, Grandma, you got all this pain. And she says, I don't care, I want a steak. So he gave her just something to carry her over. We went to, I swear, she ate a T-bone steak, a baked potato, fully loaded.
Sorry.
She, of course, didn't drink. So that was not on the plan. And we took her home, and a few days later, she started having worse pain. So she was admitted to inpatient hospice. Then one day the social worker called and said, she's got to leave because she's under control. I said, what do you mean she's got to leave? She's supposed to be dying here in a couple of weeks. Nope, you got to find a place for her. So we found a wonderful long-term care facility. And trust me, I went running around looking for one. And she literally died at the 6-week mark. And I went, what is this all about? But most of the time that doesn't happen.
Right.
But he knew that she had they did a CAT scan, and it was just all over her liver and had metastasized. And then, so having those conversations being able to say, you know what, I have this wrong with me, but I don't choose to do this because it's too extreme for me. I don't want to go through the 3rd round of chemo or the 2nd round of chemo or even try radiation. That's okay. But you have to look at that is why this conversation has to happen with a physician. I've heard people tell me, well, you can have a nurse practitioner. No, it needs to be somebody who understands you and the care that's being proposed. And then we talk about conversations with our families. And this is perhaps the hardest thing for some people to do, but I know with my mom, I knew my mom so well, she knew me so well. We've been talking about this stuff from the time I was a little girl because, of course, she lost her husband. And we'd hear, I'd always have to hear the story over and over again, but she would talk about what she wanted. One time, she lived in Milwaukee, and one time I get a call from her, and she says, I'm going to the hospital because I don't have any urine out. I said, what do you mean? She had a urinary tract infection, and she had been on prednisone for arthritis, and it masked the symptoms. And before she knew it, she was in septic shock. So I get in the car. I lived north of town at the time, north of Dayton at the time. I get in the car, throw some stuff in a bag, and I'm off to Milwaukee at 5 o'clock at night. I had to go through Chicago, and it's about 7.5, 8 hours. I get up there at 1:30 in the morning, and she's sitting up in bed, and she's got urine output. And I said, that's great. She said, so I sat with her for a while before I was dying for sleep. And I stayed with her for a few hours, and she said, this doctor came in, and he wanted to know if I needed to be resuscitated. And I said, well, I can't make that decision until she gets here. I said, well, Mom, now just look at this. You've reversed the critical situation that you were in. At the time, she was maybe 75 or, 80 years old. I said, what do you think? And she said, well, I still want to live. I said, well, okay. Then don't say you want what we call a DNR. But you see what I mean, how every situation is different? But you have to be able to have those conversations. And that's another reason why Jonathan always stresses the healthcare power of attorney in particular. So I guess I'm just giving you a little snippet of what we do in about 2 hours. But what I want to say to you, the reason we are doing this is because we feel faith communities in particular, but that's where we have the connection with, really do well by talking about death and dying as a part of being pro-life.
Right, absolutely.
They really do. And as the psalmist says, the Lord will guard your coming and your going, both now and forever. Trust in God and realize that no matter how much of a control freak you are, because I think that's what happens with people who think that if I have these Seconal tablets here, and I can just take them and then I don't have to suffer anymore. Just think, well, I have to just say this, just think of Jesus. Just think of the Garden of Gethsemane. He could have said, I don't think I really want to do this. He didn't. And I don't think that dying is necessarily such a bad, evil, terrible thing. It's God is with us. So that is why we believe that this is important. And does anybody have any questions? Because then it's lunch.
I was just told the lunch is actually ready already.
Okay, very good.
So if you want to have questions, you can talk to her during lunch.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're supposed to have lunch right around now.
Yeah.
And Steve told me some good news, that we ordered